So, dear friends, dear community, dear those who are watching this recording, either here with us on the 23rd of July on the eve of Self-Care Day or afterwards in whatever way is helpful to you. Today, we're going to be looking and focusing at the relationship with food. And the reason for that is because tomorrow is International Self-Care Day, which is always on the 24th of July, celebrating that self-care is 24/7. So 24th of July, 24/7. So it's that play on numbers there. And this is actually a focus that's been designated by the International Self-Care Foundation. It's also something that the Global Self-Care Foundation is involved with, as well as the Self-Care Forum. So there's quite a few sort of agencies and organizations that are working on an international level, national level, working directly with institutions like the World Health Organizations, all the way into more direct work like I'm doing here with you, and that kind of more sort of grassroots activism. But really recognizing that actually this is something that is important to all of us. We all have one relationship with food or another because it's something that we all need and something that we all have beliefs and behaviors about. So a bit of housekeeping. The webinar is 75 minutes. So we'll have 45 minutes of teaching and guided reflection, and this is recorded. We will then have 30 minutes of Q&R or questions and responses. This will not be recorded, and that is to ensure that we can go into more personal questions, look at maybe more sensitive issues or things you may feel more vulnerable about. And so in that space, we ask for confidentiality, and therefore it's not recorded. This is something that we've done before with webinars and has generally worked well. So if you are watching this recording afterwards and have missed the Q&R space, really honor what that brings up for you, and also know that there is a way for you to stay in touch afterwards. So care for that as feels helpful to you. If it feels helpful and you want to add your name and your pronouns in your kind of little thumbnail, you can do that by clicking on the three dots in the top right-hand corner of your screen, and then you show up in that way. You can, like I said, have your webcams on or off, but I do ask you to have your mic on mute, as that allows for an easier experience, particularly for those of us who are neurodiverse, where any sound interruptions can really affect us. And then I invite you to share comments and thoughts in the chat as we go through the webinar. And as appropriate, we will care for them during the recording, but it's more likely that we'll care for them in the Q&R once we stop the recording. And also, if you want to send direct messages to Zoe, so if you could give a little wave so people can see you there. Zoe is, I often refer to, or always refer to Zoe as my first officer. So we're both big Star Trek fans. And if I'm the captain of the Enterprise, if you know what the Enterprise is the starship, then Zoe is absolutely either my Riker or my Mr. Spock, looking after those kind of things. And so she will care for your questions and bring them into the Q&R after the recording has finished. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to be talking about why we're talking about it. Why on earth are we talking about beliefs and behaviors around food rather than whether you should eat protein or carbohydrate? And also the focus today, which is that self-care foundation focus that I mentioned earlier, with healthy eating being sort of in the spotlight this year. We'll talk about it's not what you eat, it's the way that you eat it, and that'll make a lot more sense once we get into it. Talk about how your brain works and how it drives your beliefs and behaviors, mindfulness and awareness. I'll also give some examples because beliefs and behaviors can be quite nebulous. What does that actually mean? So I will give you some examples of beliefs and some examples of behaviors to help you get a sense of, oh, I do that, or oh, no, I don't do any of that. So you got something to reference for yourself. We'll then have a guided reflection. So that's kind of sort of a semi-meditative state. Well, it's sort of, you might want to soften the focus of your eyes or close your eyes, but that invitation to check in and reflect within yourself what is coming up and what you notice. I will then teach you the ABC technique if you don't know it already, but for those of you who know it, it's a way of refreshing your sort of memory, but also apply it specifically to this focus. We'll then look at kind of embedding new habits, often referred to as rewiring your neural pathways, the way your brain works, but also why bother? And that'll make a lot more sense later, as well as Sherlocking, which is kind of a language that I use for getting curious and following the clues. We will then do kind of next steps, and then we'll end the recording and move into the Q&A. So you'll leave with hopefully greater insights into your beliefs and behaviors, awareness of what is affecting you most in terms of food, key patterns, the ABC technique, and that hopefully more compassionate self-talk and encouragement to be curious. I also want to say you'll have a doodle artwork, and that will make a lot more sense in just a minute. Also, a one-page handout recording from the webinar, and for everybody here, there will be a free 20-minute tune-up. This is part of our health or my health activism to offer space to reflect and work with what's come up for you today. And before we then go into the teaching itself, it can be helpful to get your bearings. So for you to get a sense of where am I now? How am I feeling in this moment? So if you've got pen and paper to hand, I really want to invite you to reflect on how happy are you with your relationship with food now, with 10 being like the happiest, 0 being no happiness present whatsoever. And the invitation is to email Zoe at inquiries@isithelpful.com or send Zoe a direct chat message once you've kind of thought about these things, both for you to write it down somewhere, but also so we can have a sense of where you're at. Or if you just want to do it on a piece of paper in the way that works for you, I really invite you to honor what feels most helpful to you. So the first one is, how happy are you with that relationship with food? The second question is, if you were to describe your relationship with food in one word, what word would you choose? That can be really demanding because you feel like there's lots of words you want to use. But if it was just one, would it be like unhappy, good, difficult, absent, negligent? What would be the word that you use? Then thirdly, is there one belief or behavior that you struggle with the most? So if so, how would you describe it? It's like reaching for chips when I'm stressed, for example. That could be an example of a behavior that you really struggle with. Or a belief is that if I eat food, I'll put on weight, and if I put on weight, nobody will want me. So really, if there's something that you can identify, do write that down or share that with Zoe to bring it more to your conscious awareness. And then taking a moment to reflect, what would you like to get out of today's webinar? When we come to the end, what's like one thing you'd really like to know or understand, or maybe an action to take? So we'll give a few moments for you to check in and reflect on this. There's no right or wrong answer. Simply noticing what comes up. You may find that you'll have a different answer later, today or tomorrow. That's okay. So we'll give it another minute. All right. So I hope it's been helpful to have a moment to check in with here. So I don't know if you've ever been lost in the woods and then found a big sign that says, with a map and then a red dot that says you are here. That's kind of what I'm inviting you to do, to get a sense of what's the current situation, what's the current status. If you found this uncomfortable in whatever way, just go gently with yourself. And if this has been unhelpful, that's valid too. As always, we have our own ways of engaging with these kind of invitations. So then let's go into the teaching itself. So who am I? So my name is Thor. I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of who I am. I'm originally from Iceland, hence the name. I am neurospicy or neurodiverse, mostly through being what's called a highly sensitive person. I'm also a survivor of complex PTSD, so I've recovered from complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I've also recovered from ME/CFS and fibromyalgia. And that influences a lot the work I do. I'm white other, so I'm not white British. So recognizing the privileges I have as a white person in the world. I'm also an aspirant in the Plum Village tradition, which is a Buddhist tradition. And being a Buddhist informs a lot of what I do. I'm also queer in a few different ways. Professionally, I'm first and foremost a health activist, and that's really my mojo here showing up with you. And that's also why this event is free to attend. We ask for donations because they really help. It costs a few £100s to do this webinar, which is a few hundred more dollars if you're in the US, for example. And so we accept and really welcome and appreciate donations, but we don't ask for them. We don't request them because that offers that activism sense that we want to make this information available to everybody, even those who can't afford it. I'm also a pain and fatigue specialist, and that's what I do in consultations and one-to-one work with people. Pain, fatigue, stress, and anxiety. That's kind of those kind of four feelings that I tend to work with the most. I've also created and written the manual for First Aid for Feelings, and then a few other things that you can see there on the screen. But also I have with me today Anne-Marie Miller. So Anne-Marie, are you okay to wave for people who want to see you? So Anne-Marie is a doodle artist, and it's tickled me for weeks now that she's joining us today. So you can see a little bit of her work there on the slide, but she is going to create a doodle of today's webinar. And I'm really curious to see what that's going to look like once she's done. And you'll be able to, we will share that artwork with you that you can then print off or use in whatever way feels helpful to you. But it's a way of making things a little bit more playful. And also, I think it'll be interesting for me to see what Anne-Marie translates into visuals. Because obviously I always see what I teach from my side of the world, from the inside of my experience. So to see this information presented through a different lens, I think will be helpful to me as well as hopefully to you too. So then let's move into why this conversation matters. Yeah. So one of the key things for me is that most of us have a pretty good idea of what food is better for us, it's helpful to not eat lots of fried food, or it's helpful to not eat too much sugar, so that kind of many of us at least have some knowledge of what food is kind of healthier and less healthy. But actually, where many of us struggle is how to do that food, how to eat that food consistently or even at all. But not only that, but also how we eat it. Are we eating it really fast or are we eating it slow enough to recognize, the taste of it, or when we're full? So those kind of behaviors can really affect our relationship with food, as well as some of the beliefs. So we'll talk about that a lot today. But also that food and eating is shaped by our feelings, by our thoughts, by our self-talk, by stress, by culture, by our class. There's lots of things that affect the way we engage with food. Also, when we have like these quick fixes, or we get these hacks or ways of eating things or consuming things like in a pill or something, it can often ignore the deeper drivers for our behavior. So we may be kind of replacing one thing with another, but if we don't understand what's driving behavior, like for example, we may swap, eating crisps with eating celery, because I was talking about that just earlier. But if we're still eating compulsively celery, even eating celery can become unhelpful. You can have too much celery in your body. This is true. So it's that recognizing what are the deeper drivers for this, but also that kind of how do I make more lasting change in terms of sustainable change and more helpful choices, making that more conscious. And that recognizing that food is part of self-care, that self-care and food are not separate. And I'll also be talking about sometimes when self-care can include quote unquote unhealthy food, when it's genuinely helpful. So then the approach that I will bring to this and that I always bring to everything that I do is that it's more helpful to be curious than critical. And it's my belief, and I want to be really transparent about this, is that healthy eating becomes more possible where awareness, curiosity, and compassion come together. So that will be a sort of a thread moving through the whole webinar today. So then that it's not what you eat and in the way that you eat, it's the way that you eat it. It's kind of influenced, inspired by a very kitsch 80s song, which some of you may be familiar with. It ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it, and that's what gets results. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever seen the video on YouTube. It's so kitsch. It's two British groups called Fat Boy 3 and Bananarama. And yeah, it's a very kitsch video taken from, the London Underground or shot in the London Underground. But it's so true. It's not always what you eat, it's the way that you eat, and that's what gets the results. For example, if you are used to eating really fast or you're used to eating hunched, like you're eating like this, you're more likely to get indigestion. It's a very basic example, but it's so true. And also, just because you know something is good for you doesn't mean you can always, follow up on that. And willpower is rarely helpful in terms of making sustainable and helpful change. It can be that leverage to tip you into a more helpful behavior, but it won't be the thing that helps you stay the course. And that your relationship with food has been in formation since you were born, like, or even before you were born. There's research coming through in terms of what happens in the womb, what are some of the things that happen in terms of neurotransmitters. But even as soon as you were born, you are, whether you're breastfed or you drink from a bottle, that relationship is forming straight from first minute. So really recognizing that what you're doing today is in relation to all the years you have lived and all the days you have lived before today. And that this relationship matters as much, if not more, than the food itself. And then awareness and understanding are much more likely to help you make changes rather than pressure, shame, or rigid rules. And that may sound obvious, but I do find it helpful to reiterate that all the time. So then what's driving beliefs and behaviors, and why can it be so difficult? And I want to name this straight off the bat, which is that the wiring of your brain affects your ability to be skillful or unskillful. Yeah. So this is a model of the brain that I've taken from an American professor, Professor Linden, who at the time of publishing his book, at least, was working at the Johns Hopkins University in the US, University Hospital. And he talks about the brain being like 3-scoop ice cream. So the cone is basically everything from the neck down. So the body, the sort of the rest of the body. But if I'm assuming everybody's had a 3-scoop ice cream, right? Yeah, so you know kind of what I'm talking about. The bottom scoop always sits inside the cone. It's the oldest part of the brain, always or often referred to as the reptilian part of the brain. And this is the part of your brain that is not metaphorically, but literally wired like the brain of a crocodile. I can't emphasize this enough. So this is the part of the brain that looks after all the basic functions of the body, but also the part of the brain that looks after kind of anger, aggression, snapping, protecting, your sexual needs, your sleep needs. That all comes within this part of the brain. We then have the middle scoop, which I always refer to as the group scoop, because this is the part of the brain referred to as the mammalian part of the brain, or the limbic system. Mammalian being mammals. Mammals are cats, dogs, horses, wolves, rats, mice. any animal that kind of lives in a pack. And this is our social intelligence. This is why peer pressure can, where peer pressure shows up and can affect the way we eat or the choices we make. And then here behind the forehead is the kind of human or frontal lobe, the kind of executive function, rational thought, being able to do maths, being able to operate Zoom, being able to create slides. That all happens up here. Now, because the brain, when it's just tootling, when it's not doing much at all, uses 20% of all your available energy, it means that's one of the things that can give those resources can get reallocated when there's any kind of threat. Yeah. So, which is why we've got these arrows. Cortisol goes up, access to thinking capacity goes down. So, what that basically means, the more of adrenaline you've got in your body, the less of your brain you've got available to you. And I think it's easy to forget this and not remember that this is a real biological fact. I used to think it was Thor specific, but actually this is human specific. And you would say even just animal specific. So recognizing when you are hungry, because hunger releases adrenaline in the body, hunger prevents your ability to think clearly, which is why, the device is always like, don't go shopping when you're hungry because you're likely to buy food that's not helpful for you. Yeah. So really recognizing that you may have learned something as a child. So that's really in that group scoop or the crocodile scoop that is leading you to like, I must finish the food on my plate, or I mustn't eat this or whatever. Even if you've learned some more helpful beliefs as an adult, that's more likely to sit in the top scoop. And therefore, if you're stressed, hungry, or tired, or feel threatened in any way, you're less likely to remember that. So you're more likely to reach for foods that are actually unhelpful to you. So what we then want to bring in, we want to bring in a bit of a bumper space, some brakes, yeah, on that adrenaline. So to help you access more of your top scoop. Because when you're mindful, it strengthens your ability to be more aware. It creates that bumper space between the habit. If you think Pavlov's dogs, yeah, stressed, reach for chips. Stressed, reach for chips. This is maybe a pattern that's been going for a long time, and you're just trained like Pavlov's dogs. Stimulus, response, stress, chips. So to create a bit of bumper space between those two to help you make a more helpful choice. It also, mindfulness and awareness help you become more literate, have more information about what's going on in terms of emotions or urges and cravings and sensations. So some people don't actually recognize when they're hungry, or they think they're hungry when they're actually thirsty. So that's the kind of literacy that I'm talking about. The more we pay attention, the more mindful and aware we're able to be, the more we're able to differentiate between different kinds of needs. Like actually, drink of water might be more helpful than food in this moment. And then the thing that's really sort of basic and obvious, but it's important to name it and talk about it, is that if you're feeling like you haven't got a choice, that means you're crocodiling. That means you haven't got access to that part of your brain that can think through the more resourceful choices or recognize what kind of sensation am I experiencing in my body. Yeah. And then practicing being more aware, practicing things like mindfulness or meditation, practicing doing the ABC that I'll talk about in a minute will help you strengthen that space more, or that bumper space more and more. So then let's look at examples. So let's get specific. Examples of beliefs and examples of behaviors. So I'll read out some of those that are on the screen. So look at what you recognize, like I must clear my plate. So I remember as a child, my grandmother would tell me that I had to eat everything on my plate because if I didn't, I'm not quite sure how this was going to work because there were starving children in Africa. So, and I remember kind of actually challenging her on this and going like, well, the food on this plate is not going to go in the post to Biafra or, whatever. And she would get very frustrated with me. Because she was teaching me something that she genuinely thought was helpful, but actually didn't make any sense to a little one. And also meant that I came up into adulthood with this belief that somehow clearing my plate would ease other people's suffering. And rather than maybe looking at what's the ideal portion size for me, And was the portion size she was giving me bigger than I had tummy space for, So like, I must clear my plate, or finish what you're eating, or, also don't be fussy. Just eat what you're given. Particularly for those of us who are neurodiverse, we can have lots of things around food. And so it's not about being fuzzy, it's about respecting what we feel able to eat or not able to eat. So that kind of feeling guilty or feeling difficult is a belief that we can bring with us into adulthood from childhood. I'm going to take something else here. Food fear relating to symptoms. Yeah, so particularly people who have migraines or people who struggle with fatigue, there can be fear around certain foods that they will trigger a migraine or they will deplete our energy. So recognizing we may have beliefs around food that may or may not be still relevant. So, like for example, that might have been true, 5 years ago, that certain foods would deplete your energy, or certain foods would activate migraines. But that may or may not be still true. But because the fear of the symptom is so strong, it can affect your ability to be curious. Is this still a food that I, need to stay away from? And then the other one I want to mention is orthorexia. So I don't know how many of you have heard of orthorexia. Orthorexia is basically taken from like orthodox, like it has to be right, and anorexia, the things that we're, going into unhelpful behaviors around. So orthorexia can be like particularly people who are dealing with health issues, or people who are really into kind of bodybuilding, or, those kind of, or perfectionistic tendencies, is that they must eat the healthy and right food all the time. And it become really unhelpful. It becomes extreme. So I remember working with somebody, and very soon in the consultations, it transpired that she was juicing and having juices 7 times a day. And actually, that is really dangerous for your kidneys. It's genuinely unhelpful. So she had taken the healthy eating way over the top. So we had to kind of retrain her and her body to work with a more healthy food range. And actually, we then got involved, a nutrition, sort of a functional medicine practitioner. And between the three of us, we're able to help support her to find a more healthy way of relating to food and the foods that she was actually eating. So I hope that some of those beliefs are help, and the others that I haven't mentioned, are helping you identify your own beliefs. And then using foods to eat your feelings. Yeah. So stressful eating, being rigid around food, eating too quickly, which I've mentioned before, denying yourself food as punishment, and thinking I'm too busy, I don't have time to eat. Some of those are some of the really common beliefs that I've come across in my work. So then let's take a step back. We've looked at the focus here, the way the brain works and the body, what drives, whether we're able to access the more resourceful part of us that knows what's more helpful, and then also examples of beliefs and behaviors. So I want to invite you to sort of disengage from the shared space on the screen and return or come to the inside of your experience, and do a guided reflection. So I'll do the guidance. If you feel like you can soften the focus of your eyes or close your eyes to get familiar with the inside of your experience, then that may be more helpful. But as always, recognize what you need to do in this moment and what feels safe enough for you to do in this moment. It'll be a few minutes. I will, probably about 5 minutes that we will do this. I will start with the sound of the bell. So to give us sort of a marker for starting, and then I will give a sound of the bell to close. So I've just realized that I need to change the sound, which may not be possible. So I think actually what I'll do is I won't do that. Because basically what Zoom does, Zoom has got a very clever thing where they've got a noise cancelling function. But what that does is that it cancels out this really beautiful sound of the bell. And I have realized I can't do that when I'm sharing my screen. So what I will do instead, I will just sort of say the word bell. Yeah. So I'll say the word bell. So my invitation to you is to shift from the shared space on the screen to the inside of your experience. Notice also how I'm slowing down my voice, my breath. Yeah. Inviting you to become aware of what it feels like on the inside of your experience. When we get curious, it can be helpful to pay attention to thoughts, to emotions, and to sensations in this moment, here and now. You may find that you struggle with being curious and that you're more likely to be critical. So go gently with that if you can, simply observing and not judging. It can be helpful to check in with your breath as you breathe in, being aware that you're breathing in, and as you breathe out, being aware that you're breathing out. Those very simple function of the body. Or if that feels challenging, simply bringing the focus of your attention to some aspect of your physical experience in as much or as little detail as that feels possible and practical. And as you hear the thoughts, as you observe the emotions, as you feel the sensations, noticing if there's anything that you're familiar with, anything that you're unfamiliar with. What happens when you deliberately practice being present with what arises when the focus is on your relationship with food? Mm. Yeah. You may realize that it's quite hard to be present with yourself. That's okay. There will be good reasons for that. You may find that a part of you shows up that is able to be kinder to yourself. Yeah. For most of us, being present with ourselves, at least when we start that practice, can be really challenging. So going gently with whatever you've been able to observe. Yeah. We're coming to the end of the guided reflection. Before we bring it to a close, my invitation to you is to come back to the sensations. You might want to twiddle your toes, roll your shoulders, shuffle in your seat, recognizing that you've got sitting bones. For those of you who are seated, just what that feels like. Yeah. And I want to invite you to consider a statement that sounds something like this. Even though My relationship with food isn't as good as I would like it to be. I appreciate that I am showing up here to learn skills that may help me strengthen and improve my relationship with food and help me feel better. Bell. So, as we're not able to do the actual sound of the bell, I hope the word bell can connect you with some memory of that, what that might sound like. Hmm. And I've just learned that I need to figure something out before I do this again. As always, 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 we're learning. So I want to share now that we're back kind of in the shared space on the screen, or as much as you're able to be in the shared space on the screen. I want to share with you some of you will have heard me say this because you know me in different ways in different spaces. But in my self-talk nowadays, I'm like, sweetheart, darling, honey. This is not how I spoke to myself, let's say 15, 20 years ago. It was much more critical, much more judgmental. And there was no way I could imagine that I would be as loving and endearing with myself as I am today. So, recognizing that it can take a while to find your way in terms of your self-talk. Um, and you may not want to use honey, darling, sweetheart. You may not want to be that camp or that language may not work for you. But really recognizing that, you may aspire to something based on what you've discovered through this guided reflection. So then I want to bring in the ABC technique. So some of you will be very well familiar with this. Some of you will be seeing this for the first time. So there is more information available on this. There is a course on Insight Timer. There are some blogs on the website. There's a manual. So I can show, here's the manual. This has got the technique. So there's so you don't have to learn it all today or really master it today. This is an invitation to get curious. So the ABC technique is inspired by medical first aid, and medical first aid says airways, breathing, and circulation. So I decided to use that sort of acronym or that mnemonic for feelings first aid. So awareness, breath and body, and choice. So awareness is what are you thinking, feeling, and doing? So you may realize from the reflection you've just done that there are certain things you can identify in terms of what are you thinking, feeling, and doing in this moment. The breath and body is about creating that bumper space to give you access to your top scoop again. Yeah. Because the breath, I often think about the breath, it's almost like the gearbox in a car. And athletes really know how to use this. They will use breathing in a certain way to help them get their adrenaline going, like before a 100-meter race, or how to calm themselves down afterwards. And of course, for those of us who are given birth, using Lamar's technique, breathing. Yeah. So that kind of sense of breathing is a really direct way to affect your body's biochemistry, including how much of your brain you've got access to, which is why the breath is so important. And breathing into the count of 5, breathing out to the count of 7, doing it 3 times. This is all about making your out breath longer than your in breath. So you can then, because that helps give access to the top scoop in those moments. Doing it 3 times really allows, for that change to happen. And I always invite people to have a bit of bumper space between each of those 3 to give the lungs that space so you're not forcing your lungs to do something and therefore creating maybe a bit of a threatening situation for your body. The reason why the body is involved, yeah, is because often when we are in those situations where there's a lot of stuff going on up here and we forget that we've got the whole cone. We forget to twiddle our toes. We forget we've got a whole body to connect with. And often it's the body's sensations that can help us give clues to what we need. So doing both breath and body. And sometimes you might need to do some more counting. For those of us who are physically able to maybe do some walking around, walking up and down stairs, or, doing something with your physical body to change state, to interrupt the state you were in before, so you're able to access a different state. And then the choice is about thinking through what might be more helpful than you were before. So the first question is always, whatever you were thinking, feeling, or doing, is it helpful? And chances are it's not if you're doing this exercise. Then what might be more helpful instead? And I want to introduce you to this idea of containing and completing. Are you able to care for this feeling in this moment, or do you need to contain it and come back to it later? So I'm just going to reach for this because I realize I haven't got it on my desk. So this is like a prompt pad, which has got those questions in it. So it can be helpful. The prompt pad isn't on the online shop just yet, but you can email me if you want it. But you can also just use the questions from the slide deck to help you think this through. Yeah. Because if you're in a situation where you're not able to care for the feeling, that's fair enough. Yeah. So you might want to contain it. The thing, though, if you're containing, is to make a commitment to come back to it. Yeah. So, okay. When we get home, we'll do some journaling, some EFT tapping, or I'll talk to somebody, or I'll do some reflection, so that you make the commitment to come back to it later. And if it's not possible today, that you do it tomorrow or next Tuesday or whatever it is. And of course, our self-conscious, our unconscious, or our different parts will cotton on pretty quick if we make promises to come back to this later and then we don't. Then it just comes out in all sorts of unhelpful ways. So the real must here is that we then honor our promise and commitment to ourselves. If you are able to complete this feeling now, then okay, that's something we can work with. And then I want to bring that to the questions that we can talk about. So I'll talk about them in a minute, but before I do that, I want to really talk about something that is neuroplasticity. So some of you may be familiar with the phrase that neurons that fire together wire together. This idea that your brain is like clay that can be molded, or that they are like motorways, or bridleways, that these are, and I actually, I'll just stand up because I realize I haven't got it with me here, is this. So can you see what this is? This is actually a neuron. Well, this is not an actual neuron. This is a soft toy version of a neuron. And one of the people I support sent it to me as a thank you. And I love that. She just totally gets me. And this made me very happy. So basically, your brain is made out of loads of these that kind of go top to tail with each other. And every time you have a thought or something, you do something, an electrical signal is sent basically from here to this part of the next neuron. And every time you do that, that connection is strengthened. Yeah. So you may have heard the phrase use it or lose it. Exactly. But you can also do it in reverse, so you can lose some of the unhelpful behaviors by not using them. So really that this is a beauty of the brain, and I can really get stuck in this, because I love the way the brain works. But yeah, that this is something that you can work with very deliberately. Yeah. So when you Sherlock and when you get curious about how to do things differently, it can really help you create something that you may not have thought possible before. But the thing is, you need to know why you're doing it. So when we get to the more helpful choice, it needs to be kind of, why are you bothering to do a more helpful choice? So you may see on the graphic, this is one of the graphics from the manual, the why bother first has an exclamation mark, then it has a question mark, and then it has a light bulb. So it's like, why would I bother not eating this or whatever? That's like a rhetorical question. It's like, oh, I wonder why might I not do that? What might be the benefit of not doing that? Because when you realize, oh, it always makes me feel uncomfortable, or it makes me feel bad about myself, or I get indigestion, or whatever it is, or I get constipated, or I get diarrhea, or whatever it is, when you recognize what's the thing that is a strong enough motivation, it's a strong enough why bother, then you're much more likely to be able to make a lasting change, because then you can remind yourself, I'm doing this more helpful choice. I'm making the effort to rewire my brain, with my brain cells, with my neurons, because it takes effort. Yeah. I'm making that effort because you know your why. And even when you're like, I'm not going to eat that, I'm not going to eat that, I know I'm not going to eat that because of my why bother. We need that to help us stay the course. And research shows that on average, it takes 66 days to embed a new habit, but it ranges from like 18 days to 254. I love how specific this is. Only statistics and research can get to this level of detail. Yeah. And what was most interesting, in this research is that actually diet changes are considered to be the most complex changes. Yeah. So that's the kind of 254 days. I mean, that's like the year is 365 days. So we're talking like 8 months or something here. So recognizing that rewiring something as complex as a relationship with food, with commitment, determination, support, and all of that can take, for the best part of a year. So this isn't something you're gonna, solve by Sunday. So really giving yourself that patience and that compassion, and also why you need to know why are you making that effort? What is a strong enough incentive for you to invest in that? So having taken this little detour into why bother from the kind of more helpful choice, because this is what will drive the more helpful choice, then let's get into some helpful questions. So this is what I refer to as Sherlocking. There's a whole chapter on Sherlocking in the manual. And you can see, obviously, Sherlocking, Sherlock Holmes, is like getting curious and following the clues. So here are some questions to help you open up. Yeah. Almost like create a mind map of what is it that's influencing your food choices and your food behaviors. So what did you learn about food from your family of origin? And notice the family of origin is different from family of choice. So family of origin is the family you're born into. Family of choice is the family you are choosing to be in, which may or may not include family of origin, because I know there are people here who have got experienced estrangement from their families. But also in terms of your culture, what are the cultural beliefs around food? And that can differ from, between different countries, but also between different maybe religious cultures. So there can be lots of different factors that influence your food beliefs. Um, when you're struggling or suffering, what happens in terms of food? Because some of us stop eating, some of us eat more, some of us do like the stop start. So we'll binge and then not eat and binge and not eat. So that can just like what happens when you're struggling or suffering in any way? And that what usually triggers unhelpful food habits for you? Is it around, is it when you're around your dad? Are you more likely to eat unhelpful food when you're around your dad? Or is it when you're doing certain kind of tasks or when you're in a certain situation? And then starting to look at, how can you be a little bit kinder to yourself? What might that sound like? Like my kind of sweetheart. Come on, sweetheart. Let's have some celery. Yeah. Or that kind of, okay, one of the biggest things we do is we give ourselves a huge goal. Yeah. So it's like what's one small shift you can practice? What's one small thing I can do? Yeah. And I can talk about that more in the Q&A later. But it's only by Sherlocking that you'll be able to get access to that and get curious about that in a way that's anyway meaningful and constructive. So we're coming to the end of the recorded part. So hopefully what you're leaving with is a greater insight and awareness, that kind of more compassionate self-talk, some questions that you can then work with. And remember the artwork from Anne Marie, the handout, the recording, the tune-up, that even after you finish this recording or, we finish, you're watching this maybe after today, you're not alone. You've got more resources that you can access. You've got more connections that you can make. And then we want to finish off with where are you now? On the scale of 1 to 10, how happy are you now about your relationship? Has something changed in the last kind of 45 or 50 minutes? What if, the word you had at the beginning, is that different now? And have you got what you wanted at the beginning? Bearing in mind that those of you who are here in person, we still got the Q&A, so that score may change. But I'm going to give a few moments for you to check in and maybe jot down some notes and comparisons. Okay. You can always come back to these questions later, after you finish the recording or after we finish the Q&A if you're here with us today. So next steps. Firstly, what one thing, like I mentioned earlier, what one insight or one more helpful choice can you take forward from today? And not only that, but how? How can you do that? What can you put in place to support that? Who can help you do that? Allies, crew. Then the 20-minute tune-up, which we'll do. It says here to schedule the tune-up, but I know Zoe actually is going to follow up with you directly, so you don't do, ignore that one. And then next, there are more resources. There's the helpful newsletter. There's the manual. There's the Inside Timer library, which has got lots of free meditation as well as the course. And we've got live events every Thursday at 5:30 UK time. Um, and then, of course, in November, we've got Self-Care Week. So we've got a panel discussion planned for then. So you might want to see if you come today, if you come again in November, then you've got a bit of before and after. You can check what's changed in the months between now and November. So giving yourself those kind of markers may be helpful and knowing that this is a shared experience. And then finally, as always, a gentle reminder, you don't need to change everything all at once. And that lasting change begins with a moment of awareness, a gentler breath, or one more helpful choice when we're able to bring together that awareness, the curiosity, and compassion. All right. So for those of you here watching this recording, we're now coming to the end of the recording. And in a moment, I'll ask Zoe to close the recording, not just yet. Do check in with yourself how it feels having done this, knowing that you're watching this afterwards, whether you were here at the time or you're watching this without having been here for the Q&R, whatever comes up for you, noticing that it's all information. And when we have access to information, we can Sherlock that. So that kind of phrase is more helpful to be curious than critical. So till next time, for those who are ending the recording, remember to go gently with yourself. And as always, 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 that kind of being present as much as you're able to in each moment with what is real and true for you.